Over half of all Americans believe a third major party is necessary for today's politics. With us is Nick Brana. He was the national political outreach coordinator for the Bernie Sanders campaign through the 2016 National Democratic National Convention and went on to become a founding member of Our Revolution. He is now the founder and national coordinator at Movement for a People's Party. Nick, welcome to the show.
Hey, Kim, it's great to be here.
So you're starting a third party. That's what it
That's
sounds
uh,
like.
that's right. Me and 60,000 plus other people. That's right. And then millions of others who need it desperately.
Okay, so let's talk about, obviously there are some other third parties that are out there. I know that people want a third major party. We do still have a Libertarian Party. We have a Green Party. I'm sure there's some other fringe parties that are out there. What do you think? So this People's Party, is it called People's Party or is this a movement? It's called Movement for a People's Party. Is the People's Party already formed? Is this a movement to create a third party? What exactly is it?
It's the movement to create a third party, essentially, or as we like to refer to it more clearly, a major new party, because that's what we're aiming for. We're aiming to replace the Democratic Party in particular, but also the Republican Party.
Okay. And to create a major third party. So it's not
That's right.
necessarily named at this point People's Party. This is a movement to create one.
That's right. We're going to have a People's Convention around August of this year to provide contrast with the Democratic and the Republican parties, actually show them what a people's kind of party looks like. And then we were going to move from that to a founding convention and getting ballot access in 2021.
Wow. Okay. So this is not something where there would be a candidate on the ballot for this upcoming November general election.
No candidates in 2020. This is about really looking seriously at what it takes to create a major new party in the United States. There are ballot access requirements, of course. There are requirements for state filings. It's challenging, but it can absolutely be done. And the majority of Americans are calling for it now.
Yeah. So what is the difference between this and like the Green Party or the Libertarian Party?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few differences. One of them is that for the Green Party, for example, they've done a great job of kind of blazing the trail of what a new party, should be in terms of the issues. They stand for a lot of the right issues, but the problem is that they've kind of picked up a sense of not being viable since they've been around for about 30 years, and they're kind of, unfortunately, fair or not, they're now kind of considered a marginal party. And
Mhm.
so when you look at what's happening abroad, when you look at our own history, and party systems are breaking down abroad, like in Mexico, you have the Morena party, just replaced the major parties over there. You have in Spain, Podemos, you have Syriza in Greece, you have in France, you had France Insoumise. So you've had it in Frente Amplio in Chile. So many other countries, center-left parties in particular, are breaking down and they're giving way to major new parties, and they
Mhm.
have somewhat different electoral systems, but it can be done here too, because the same thing that's powering it, a disgust with neoliberalism, and also the internet, which has created new ways of getting around kind of the corporate media, new ways of crowdsourcing fundraising models. It's all made it possible, and so that's essentially what we're aiming to do.
So how are you going to ensure that this new party that you create isn't going to become just another fringe third party like the Green Party?
Yeah, exactly. And that it's a really good question. And so that is why looking into history, it's at the social science about how this has actually been done before. And so there is an example in US history. That's when the Republicans replaced the Whigs, successfully doing it. A lot of people don't know it took a third party, a new party in the United States to abolish slavery. It took the Republican Party replacing the Whig Party. And so, and just like the other parties abroad, it takes a new party to come about at the right time, when there is the level of disgust has peaked with the two major parties, which is something that has happened now. And we can definitely talk about like the statistics behind that and, why that is particularly, I mean, with the response to the pandemic, which has just been atrocious from both parties, particularly the Democrats. But it is, it's that coming around at the right time, and then aiming very specifically to bring people together from both the Democratic and the Republican parties. And so not just, to create a working class coalition that breaks through the traditional divides that exist in our country and really reshapes American politics around this working class coalition.
Mm-hmm. And you and I have talked about this before. I'm a real big believer in we have to draw if you're going to create a third party, and I'm all for a third party. I'm ready for a third party. I'm disgusted by both parties. I don't, I'm not in either party. I'm not going to be in either party. So
Yeah.
I'm the type of person that wants that third party. But in order for it to be successful, I really believe it has to pull from not just the Democratic side, but it also has to pull from the Republican side, because history shows if you just pull from one side, I think this is sort of why Green and Libertarian have become fringe parties, is because they only take a subset of one party. Green tends to take people from the Democrats, and Libertarians take from Republicans, and so they don't make enough of a dent in order to be really viable. And we've seen throughout history a previous attempt at a progressive party, which was done by a Republican, Teddy Roosevelt, and that didn't end up working out because all they did was just split the Republican vote, and then the Democrats kept winning, and people got fed up with the Democrats kept winning every time. Nobody likes to be a loser over and over and over again, and so they just eventually fall back in line. The problem, though, that I see is that in my experience in talking to others who are interested in a third party, specifically those who tend to come from the progressive wing, the progressive half, and I know you guys had some pretty big news about our revolution in Los Angeles, and I want to talk about that. But the problem that I'm getting from that wing is that they are really looking really seemingly to just replace the Democratic Party and not so much align with anybody from the right, because they feel like morally they just do not agree with anybody that comes from right-wing America. And in this press release that you guys released yesterday about our revolution joining Los Angeles, it kind of sounds like that to me, that this is more of an attempt at a replacement of the Democratic Party rather than trying to create more of a populist third party that draws the populist wing out of the left and the populist wing out of the right. I mean, what do you think of that? I mean, how are you navigating that?
We are looking to do exactly what you're describing, because we agree. It's that you need to pull from both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. And really, a lot of people are just with the Republican Party because they're disgusted with the Democratic Party. I mean, nobody's with either party because they want to be there. They're just there because they hate the other party, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is now, when you look at the issues, you find the makings of a coalition that can create a major new party, and those are the economic populist issues, many of which Bernie ran on his platform. Medicare for all, that's at about 70%. I think it's higher now in the pandemic. And that's, of Americans of support. Free public college is at about 60%. Getting money out of politics is at about 90%. And so these are the makings of a populist coalition that brings together, those who consider themselves on the left and the right, which I consider that to be a false dichotomy. I think what it really is it's basically top down. It's the people who own all the wealth. It's the people who own, investments, stocks, the people whose wealth is soaring right now with record stock market jumps, at the same time that like 35% of the country is having trouble affording food. 35% of households with children having trouble affording food. So it's not, it's like this kind of left-right divide is largely a false dichotomy. It's really the people who have the wealth against everybody else. And that's, the basis upon which this new party needs to be created to succeed. And just like you're saying, for that reason, it needs to build the coalition around issues and not ideological labels. That said, the Democratic Party right now, I mean, the people who can form like the initial base, when you look at who's going to break off, from the major two parties right now, I mean, those people are, the left populist at the moment. It is like
Right.
Bernie Sanders base. Those are the people who are splitting right now. And
Mhm.
so right now, I think that we need to consolidate all of those. We need to kind of increase the consensus, among the left populist movement that we should do this and that we should do it as a working class coalition.
Yeah, I just think it's going to be difficult to convince people that they've got to embrace people who voted for Donald Trump in 2016 and probably who will vote for Donald Trump in 2020. I think it's going to be a real challenge to get those people on board to say, listen, um, and the only way you can do that, which I think is absolutely imperative, is to just stay away from morality. Keep morals out of politics. And that is really difficult for people to do because for the last couple of decades, it seems like we've been really largely casting our votes based on morals. It was, what do we morally want this country to be shaped through, in which way? It was, the arguments were, of course, gay marriage, women's reproduction rights, racism. We have obviously sexism. Now it's like, which rapist are you going to vote for? You know, uh, and so these issues kind of, because they seep into the political sphere and in many ways rightfully so, um, that's where things I think get really, really tricky because somebody from the left might feel like there's just no way I can align with somebody who's pro-life, even though there's actually quite a few Democrats who felt alienated by the Democratic Party for being pro-life. They felt like they aligned with Democrats in most other issues, but because they were pro-life, they were basically cut out. And I think that's just where you're going to have the biggest issue. I know that for myself, I'm friends with the Convo Couch, for example, and Pasta and Fiorella. We have this conversation, and Pasta and I totally
Right.
agree that you've got to bring in the right wing. You've got to have a more fiscal, economic viewpoint to this party and stay away from the morality. But, Fiorella says there's just no way I can do it. And I think that's the mentality that's going to be really difficult to break through. People are going to want to put their morals into this party.
Yeah, it is that is difficult. I think that Bernie Sanders has been a good example of how you do it, though. I think there are others who have been a
In
good examples
2016,
in
right? I mean, in
2016.
2020, he kind
Exactly.
of,
In You're right. In 2016, where he was very disciplined about talking about those populist economic issues. And actually, when you look at his coalition in 2016, it you can see this in who voted for him and how it changed in 2020. And so in
mhm.
2016, he was pulling in rural voters, independents, young people, even to a greater degree. Than when in 2020, his coalition changed,
Yeah,
and part of it is because I think he went, in that direction that you're talking about more, more heavily towards like issues
the
of identity
moral. Yeah,
politics.
right, exactly. Yeah,
Right. But also it's because he associated himself with the Democratic Party, and so he was an outsider and he lost his outsider credibility.
yeah.
And, I mean, he did a tour with Tom Perez. He took an official position in the Democratic Party. He was saying things like, Biden's my friend. He's not corrupt. He could win.
Yeah, and,
It's like,
and I'll support whoever the nominee is. He should have done what Trump did in 2016, where
no
Trump
doubt
just
about
said,
it.
I'm not doing any of that. No, I mean, I'm not going to support just whoever.
Right.
He continued, even though he was running on the Republican ticket, remained an outsider the entire time.
Exactly.
Yeah, that is where Bernie Sanders definitely messed up. I think going into 2020, this time around, he completely messed up by adopting that. Um, that is just going to be really, really challenging. I mean, that I just keep going back to that. I just think that's going to be the biggest aspect about, because I totally agree. I think that the economics, and I've always been more of a class warfare person. I just think that class
Mm,
warfare is the crux of all of our problems. That if we can, once people change their class, when they're able to elevate themselves, when they're able to bring money into their
mm,
families, into their homes, and get a better education and have better access to, a variety of things. And I understand that racism does play a part and sexism plays a part in holding people back. I think you can largely correct, rather than trying to correct the racism first, which then would some people believe once you correct the racism, then the economics follow. I believe it's the opposite. I believe that the economics correct the racism. Um,
The racism has been institutionalized. I mean, it's been institutionalized into the amount of investment that we put in different communities, like communities of color. And so that absolutely needs to change, and I think that's what you're saying. And so, if that can be done from it, I mean, on an economic basis, I mean, then that's the biggest kind of change that you can imagine in standard of living, in equalizing racial and gender conditions in this country. And so I think so too.
Yeah, there's just a lot of people that, who end up voting on the right side of the aisle. They just feel alienated by the Democratic Party when the Democratic Party brings up racial issues all the time,
Mm.
and you've got a struggling white person who's living in a poor area. I grew up in Idaho, which was largely white. Of course, my family was Vietnamese and white. But there were definitely really poor white people who lacked opportunity because maybe they didn't sound as educated as the white people on the right side of the tracks. They were from the wrong side of the tracks, as they say. And they were judged and they were held back. And maybe it wasn't as severely because you couldn't just necessarily look at them and tell, although I mean, you kind of can tell which you can tell a lot of times by looking at people, unfortunately, which class they come from, right? You can tell a poor person or like a homeless person from like somebody who's really rich driving around in a Mercedes, right? And the way they dress, the way that, the clothes they're wearing, the car they're driving, things like that. But I think that's where people start to feel really alienated. And I know that where I'm from in Idaho, a lot of people talk about that. They say, maybe I'm white and I'm not a woman and I'm not a person of color, but I'm struggling and I'm not making it, I'm not getting ahead. And the American dream seems impossible for me. And yet the only thing the Democratic Party talks about is, well, unless you check one of these identity boxes, we're just not going to do anything for you. Like you're a privileged person. And that person doesn't feel privileged at all. They're sitting there struggling. And then they go to the Republican side and they're like, well, but then I go over here and I'm a racist. And these guys are historically the party that is for the rich people that just wants to continue the robbery, even though both parties now are definitely doing that. But it's certainly, I think, an angst that a lot of Americans are feeling, no matter who they are, their gender, their color, they're feeling squeezed by the system, especially now. I was talking to my dad and I was asking him back when he was young, when he bought his first home, how many times his salary was the price of the house. And he said it was 2.5 or 3 times his annual salary was the price of the home. Well, it's like these days you would need 5 times or 6 times your salary to buy the house. Back then he could go to college and he could work a summer job, earn enough money, and pay for college based on what he made in the summer. And now, I mean, that would be absolutely impossible. You have to go into massive debt in order to go to college. Same thing buying a car. Back then, you took out a 2-year loan for your car. Now it's like a 7-year loan. They keep
Yeah.
increasing it. It was 4 years, and then it was 5 years and 6 years, and now they're 7-year loans. I mean, people are just feeling so squeezed, and this pandemic definitely is showing that even more so, people are even becoming more and more squeezed. So I definitely think this is a really great idea that you guys are going to focus on the economics of this and the getting money out of politics.
And I want to say that, like, I mean, we talked about this, before, but my family is Latino. We come from Chile. They actually left Pinochet's regime, and that's very much informed my own politics and my own thinking. And coming here and growing up first generation American, my first language is Spanish, and I grew up, with Latino friends of my parents, living in an apartment here outside of DC, and uh, uh, and so some of my first experiences are actually experiencing racism myself.
Mhm.
Not being able to communicate with the rest of my school and my classmates and and other people, and not being able to understand what they were saying, but knowing, for example, that they were making fun of me for coming from somewhere else and for speaking in a different way.
Right.
Um, and even with those experiences, I understand that what the Democratic Party has done and what the Republican Party has done over these last 4 or 5 decades is that the Democratic Party in particular has abandoned its working class labor orientation, and it has become more and more in alignment with big business and Wall Street, and it foregone and dropped essentially everything that made it this kind of working class party. And so essentially, the two parties have taken economic policy off the table because they all agree we need massive inequality. They all agree we need healthcare that's completely unaffordable. They all agree that student debt should bankrupt you. There's no party that you can vote for that's a major party that doesn't think that. The same thing with foreign policy. We've essentially taken foreign policy and we've said, boom, it's now bipartisan, just like the economic policy. It's like we agree with the endless wars, the mass surveillance that comes with it. All of that is basically standardized. And so the only thing that really distinguishes the two parties now, is these identity politics issues. And obviously, like myself, I said, I understand the importance of those issues of racism is real. I've experienced it in my life, and I have I have kind of the privilege of passing as white, but it just means that people are racist towards me without them knowing that I'm Latino. And so, but seeing, what these two parties have done, I know, and I think millions of other people do, that what can form this coalition right now against these two parties to actually get them out, and all of the immense harm that they're doing, particularly now during the time of the pandemic, is to form this coalition, particularly around economically populist issues and the issues of corruption. Because when you look at the parties abroad, they are running against the corruption of the neoliberal parties, and that's how they're succeeding. And that's the issue that unites essentially everyone in the United States, is getting money out of politics and running against the corruption of the Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, what has happened is, you're right, these two parties are one and the same when it comes to their fiscal policies and their foreign policies. I mean, they're just the same. And the only divider that they have is they take moral authoritarian viewpoints that are different. It's just pick your moral authoritarian basket, right? So you're either you're pro-life, you're the Christian value type platform, or on the left, it's we don't want to be racist, sexist, bigots, right? So it's kind of pick your morals, and then that's the party you're going to go with, and that has continued the mass inequality that is just getting worse and worse and worse in this country. But it is really important, I think, moving forward with the third party, for people to somehow look past the morality. And that is so difficult for people to do, but to say, you know what, we're going to put those issues aside and, live your life morally the way you want to live your life. But let's focus on how we want our government to actually work for the people, to clean up our government, clean up the corruption, and move forward. So definitely needed. And I think a lot of people would agree. But the big question now is, how do you get this done? So what's the plan?
Yeah. And so you did a great video. Shout out to you about this. That I've watched a couple of times, and it was fantastic.
Thank you.
And some of the stats that everybody should know is that over the last decade and a half, there has been this growing kind of disgust with the major two parties, to the point where there's now a large majority of Americans, 57% to 38%, who want a major new party. Then when you look at the number, another phenomenon that's been happening over the same time period is that the two parties have essentially been dissolving, into like millions of people have been leaving and becoming independents,
Right.
to the point at which you now have about 42-45% of the country that is independent, and only
Wow.
27%, yeah, huge plurality, only 27% that consider themselves Democrat and 27% that consider themselves Republican. And here's something that blew me away is that, and these figures come from Gallup because they track it annually and they have for like a couple decades, is that when you actually, Gallup further asked those 27% who identify as Democrats and 27% who identify as Republicans, and they said, hey, well, you guys are the ones who haven't left yet, but if there was a new party, would you leave? So essentially, are you happy with it? And half of each of them said they would.
Wow.
And so that boils it down to half of 27%. It's about 12% in the Democratic Party and 13% in the Republican Party, of Americans who are actually happy to be there. And so everyone else just wants something different and is
Right.
totally disgusted with what exists. And so there's an enormous kind of desire for this. When you look at those polls, when you look at the issue polls that we talked about, and then when you look also at the loss of confidence of institutions, about 50 years ago, 80% of people said that they trust the government to do the same thing, basically all the time or most of the time. You know what it is now? 20%.
Yeah.
20%. And the approval rating for Congress, which was which was far higher, is now at like almost in the single digit. Like it gets into the single digits.
Oh yeah.
And so
Congress is so ineffective. I mean, it's the
the
worst branch of
yeah,
government.
the
They don't get
disgust is
anything done.
there.
Yeah,
So the
totally.
desire is there now.
So what
No.
what is the next step? So what do you need? So how can people learn more about Movement for a People's Party? And right now, it is. I guess before that, it is right now, like you're saying, because right now the left is very fractured because of the Bernie Biden situation. Whereas right now the right is still somewhat gelled together. As long as they have Trump, I think right now, who represents a right wing populist movement, I think you still have people fired up on the right that are willing to follow Trump. I think what will really probably happen, I don't know if the Republican Party is going to allow their party to be hijacked again after, if Trump wins
Mm.
again this year and he goes until 2024, I don't know if the Republican Party is going to say, well, now this is a populist right wing party, so I guess we're going to stick with it. I think they're going to try to take their party back in the way that the Democrats have tried, how they successfully have kind of done, wrangled it away from Sanders. But definitely as I think Republicans start to alienate that base again, come 2024 and they try to go back to normalcy, then there's going to be definitely an exodus from Republicans where people say this isn't the party for me anymore. We want America first, and we need to rebuild our country and our infrastructure and jobs and manufacturing and all this stuff back here to America. So I guess the big challenge is, what do people need to do, and then how do you end up getting, as this party forms, and it clearly in the beginning naturally will be filled more with left wingers. How do you then say to the right wingers, we are still welcoming for you too. You're not becoming a left winger. This is not a left wing party.
That's right. And that's the importance of kind of not using the labels as the party evolves. And that's, obviously something which, at the founding convention, that's where the final platform is going to be decided,
Mm-hmm.
and there's going to, there's a lot of discussion that's happening now. There's a greater realization, I feel. For example, I think the show Rising has really helped that realization kind of emerge that, this needs to have, this really needs to bring together people, from across the working class into this
Right.
coalition. And so I think that's, that's how we can navigate that. And I think also, I don't think that even people on the right, or people who voted for Trump, I don't think that they're necessarily wedded to him or the Republican Party either. Figures don't show that. He's more populist than Biden and then the Democrats, which is really troubling, and which really to me indicates that he's going to win again. I mean, he's getting to the left of the Democrats on like Medicare for he's expanding Medicare to COVID patients.
Right,
He's like
right,
he suspended student debt, federal student debt.
right.
He suspended rent and he suspended foreclosures and evictions. So he's got, and of course on trade he's also to the left of them. So
And on some foreign policy, not all, but some,
yeah.
small areas, but nonetheless.
Whereas the Democrats, because they don't represent working people anymore, like they rather than actually change their policies and pick up policies that would help like the majority of Americans, they have just traded their base. Like that's how they've literally like moved into like wealthier suburbs,
Mm,
rather than actually pick up issues that would appeal to working people. And so there's and that's kind of terrifying because they've ceded that to Republicans. But at the same time, Trump. The guy, like we know, he filled his administration with billionaires. I mean, he's just been absolutely legislating for, governing for Wall Street. And so I absolutely think that if a major new party comes about and it exposes him along with the Democrats, and Biden, that it can build that kind of coalition and it can bring a majority of Americans together into it. That's our plan, is to become the largest party in the next 4 years, run in the midterms, and run for the presidency.
I think it's definitely possible, that's for sure. So, what can people do? What do people need to do who are watching, who want to get involved, they want to learn more? Where do they go? What do they do?
Come and join us at peoplesparty.org. And so you can sign up to volunteer. You can sign up to start a local chapter. You can also make a contribution. Just sign up for our updates. And we will put you in touch with folks who are organizing locally because we're building those local chapters now. We're also, as you mentioned, we're really excited because we have the first Our Revolution chapter has decided to break from the Democrats and join us. Our Revolution Los Angeles, which represents 10,000 people, has just broken off and is joining us. And together with Our Revolution Los Angeles, we're going to be hosting a call for all organizations, people who are thinking of affiliating with MPP, who are interested in starting a chapter in their local city or area, and organizations like other Our Revolution chapters that are interested in affiliating. We're holding a joint call together with them on Thursday at 8:30, and you can find that at the top of our homepage, peoplesparty.org.
Okay, and I will definitely put those links down below. And I just want to say, Nick, I mean, this is great, and you're doing a big thing, and it looks like it's only growing and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I just want to, if I could just give you my 2 cents on what I think you just really need to do. It is when you create the platform, when you're making, you've got the website, but when you put the language in there that people are going to read in order to convert them over to the movement. I think it's really important that you put in phrases that come from not only the left, but also come from the right. Put in,
So true.
sprinkle them in there, because then that way, when somebody who was more aligned with the Republican Party and maybe who was attracted to Trump and the America First sort of language, that stuff is there for them as well. And when they read it, they hear not just Medicare for all, but they see maybe America First also. And it makes them say, hey, okay, this is interesting. This is different. If they just read and it just sounds like it's coming from the Sanders campaign, I think that might, especially the way the Sanders campaign, because I think what happened, unfortunately, was because Sanders did shift quite a bit this time around and became more into and went more into the identity politics, even the messages he had in 2016 that people really identified with have almost been tainted slightly as like as far left. And I think when you incorporate some of the phrases that might be uncomfortable for people that are coming from the left wing progressive side, it might make them cringe a little bit. But when they stop to think about it, it's not really that cringy. and you sprinkle those phrases in there, I think you're going to really then start to get the people from more of the right side of the aisle or independents that tend to lean a little that way. Then they'll say, hey, this might be for me too. It doesn't alienate me. I'm not converting to the dark side of the far left. you know?
I
So,
agree, and the way that I see it is that there are terms like freedom, and like family values, that the right
right,
has appropriated.
right.
That it just makes no sense to me why the left has ceded those. Since when is freedom, working like three jobs, not being able to afford healthcare, not being able to send your kids to college? Like, when is that free? Are
Right.
you really free if you live under the conditions of like that you have student debt where the print like the interest like masses up faster than you can pay, down the principal or even cover that interest? Like, that is
Hmm.
not freedom, And so that, I feel, that's something that we can and we should take back, when we're doing this, because that's universal.
Right, exactly. Yeah, terms like freedom, liberties, there's a lot of stuff
Right.
there. Even America first, I'm not, especially now with this pandemic, and you're looking around, you're like, well, China was China first. Like there's a lot of countries that are obviously looking after their people and looking after their nations as they should. That's actually kind of what you're supposed to do as government, is look after your
Yeah.
constituents and your countries.
I don't know if we have to say America first, but like, you can phrase it in a way that it communicates that we are taking care of our people in a
Yeah.
way that hasn't been done, I mean, before, because these two parties have just cared about, creating like the most efficient and effective like vacuum cleaner for wealth, up to the top.
Yeah. Well, good luck to you. I mean, I think it's going to be, I think it's definitely needed. I just think it's going to be a big feat to, I mean, because you're going to have hurdles in many areas, not just trying to convert people that might look at this and think it's maybe too far left. But you're also going to have, obviously big money against you, big money.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a tough challenge as well.
Well,
But
I think we've proven that it can be done.
yeah,
I mean, I think the Sanders campaigns proved it.
yeah,
$230 million the first time, $200 million, $27, average the first time. So I don't think that it's kind of dawned on in the United States what an incredible revolution the internet was, because the internet facilitated like everything about the first Bernie campaign. When he started
hmm,
that campaign, he had 3% name recognition, no money, anointed candidate against him, media hated him, laughed him off, and he went from that 3% to 100% name recognition, and would it, to the point at which he would have won that primary had the Democratic Party not stepped in to cheat him out of it and rigged him
yeah,
out of it. And so, he did that because his organizing was online, and now
right.
he was using an app. It's because he was using social media very effectively, particularly video often. It's because he was crowdsourcing donations and having recurring monthly donations, something they prioritized this time. Everything that they did, getting the information out online as well, and particularly with the flourishing of independent media, that's easier. And so everything that used to be kind of constrained to the two parties and monopolized, all those institutional kind of building mechanisms, are now available to build a major new party. This the exact same way that his campaign, was run, is the way that other parties abroad are doing it. So we don't
Right.
exactly have to reinvent the wheel. It's been done, and we can do it here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I definitely think that you can. So, thank you, Nick, for being on the show. And I do have those links down below for anybody that is interested in checking out a movement for a People's Party. I definitely think it's time. A lot of people are very fed up with current politics in Washington. It's just, it is pretty disgusting. So, Nick, thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Anytime.
We'll talk again, I'm sure.
Looking forward to it.